Welcome to those who are joining us for the first time, and welcome to our monthly scholars. Welcome to part 2 of Dr. Thomas Hawk's lecture, Sun, Snow, and Seals, Studying Seals to Save Humans. This is the second part of a 3-part lecture series with Dr. Hawk. Dr. Hawk's lecture is about Antarctica and the research he did there on seals. In part 1, Dr. Hawk tells us about how Antarctica was discovered and teaches us about the terrain, climate, and wildlife there. In part 2, Dr. Hawk shares photos and stories, and we discover what living in Antarctica is like for human beings. Dr. Hawk is a professor in the Department of Pathology and Molecular Medicine at McMaster University. He's a muscle biologist. He researches how muscles fix themselves, how they get bigger with exercise, and smaller when someone is sick. It's his expertise. You'll have to keep watching to find out how a muscle biologist ends up studying seals in Antarctica. We hope you enjoy our lecture today. Please stay tuned for part 2 of Dr. Thomas Hawk's lecture, Sun, Snow, and Seals, Studying Seals to Save Humans.
Welcome back, everyone. Block 2, Living in Antarctica. Some people are marine biologists or geologists or physicists, and their whole research is taking them to Antarctica, and that's something they've always done. Me, on the other hand, I study our muscles and how our muscles are able to get bigger when they exercise and how they can fix themselves when they get damaged and how your muscles may get smaller if you get sick. So when my friend asked me if I wanted to go to Antarctica, I was pretty shocked. And the reason he wanted me to go was because he wanted to study the muscles of seals, and he needed somebody who was an expert in muscles. Even though I had never planned at any point in my life to go to Antarctica, the opportunity arose and I couldn't say no. The first thing I needed to do, though, obviously, was to learn some geography, and I knew nothing really about the continent itself. And it really surprised me, and I've shown you here in a map, there are a lot of research stations in Antarctica. There are 3 primary ones. Palmer Station on the peninsula here. There is the McMurdo Station here on the Ross Sea, and Scott Amundsen South Pole Station. Here's a long trip. We had to leave from Toronto Airport, and I had to fly and meet my colleagues in Dallas, Texas, where we had to work out some logistical things, such as getting all of the GPS units and other things that we would need when we were down there, some research supplies. Then we flew to Los Angeles, where we got on a flight and went around the world to Auckland, New Zealand. Flew from Auckland, New Zealand to Christchurch, which is where the United States Antarctic Program houses their off-site warehouses and everything that we need to figure out what we were going to take with us. This is the research team, with the exception of Allison Hindle from Winnipeg, who joined us while we were down there. So Dr. Canados, Dr. Rebecca, Dr. Trumbull, and myself. One of the first things that we did when we got down there was went to the CDC in Christchurch, New Zealand, or the Clothing Distribution Center, to get all of our nice Antarctic weather gear while we were down there. And then once all that was set, and we waited for a few days as there were storms in Antarctica, we were able to board a C-17 Globemaster.
Cool!
The only planes that are allowed to fly in and out of the United States research stations are United States Air Force planes. So in essence, you can kind of consider it a military base down there, even though it's not a military base. It's managed by the military in some regards. It looked like it was going to be a great flight until you got inside and realized that there are just wires everywhere, and it was cold and it was loud. So this is a joke when I said every seat was first class. And the flight was about 5 hours long. So we flew from Christchurch, New Zealand, down to Ross Island. Ross Island is just off of the Antarctic coast, and we talked about this in Block 1, that Scott bases and the Shackleton base that were used for expeditions were located on Ross Island. The Ross ice shelf, which is permanent ice, never goes away, is at the far edge of the Ross Island. And you can see that it's almost like the Ross Island is anchored to Antarctica by this Ross ice shelf. This area here, McMurdo Sound, is transient ice, ice that will, most Antarctic summers will melt and icebreakers can come in to the McMurdo Station. After the plane landed on the ice runway, everybody got out and got on the buses. And these buses look like buses that you would find anywhere else except for the massive, massive tires on these things. So that was pretty interesting to have to climb up a huge set of stairs just to get onto the bus itself. But when you looked from the bus to where you were going to be spending the next 3 months, it was pretty scary. It looked very cold, isolated. It was something I'd never thought I'd ever expect. When you got there, things were generally either white with snow, blue with the blue sky, or brown. There's no grass, there's no trees, and the land is basically volcanic land because the Ross Island was believed to be a volcanic island. But there were lots of things on this McMurdo Station that surprised me. They had a recreation center and a bowling alley, a wine bar, some operations centers, so they called them weather ops or ops. They even had a fitness center, research labs, and then an area for dining and administration. You could even get a haircut. The dormitories were quite small. As you can see here, my roommate, Dr. Trumbull, and I, one of us had to get out of bed at a time because the two of us, if we got out of bed at the same time, would bump into each other. It got pretty cramped in there, but he was a great roommate and we had a lot of fun. The dining hall, quite large, and food was actually quite good, except for things that you get used to when you live in Ontario, such as lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, were not very common there because you had to wait for a flight to come down. And if there was ever fresh fruit or vegetables that came down on a flight, they were usually gobbled up pretty quickly by the research teams and workers that were there. There was also a gym. It was pretty old looking and some of the stuff was not in great shape, but it was nice to be able to get some workouts in. The research labs were in very good shape. They were state of the art, and you can see Dr. Trumbull and Dr. Hindle, who had come to join us while we were down there. We did a lot of work here with the samples that we brought in from the field that we had to prepare to be analyzed. So that took place after we got our samples from the ice. And there was always something that would surprise you when you were down there. And one of the things that surprised me after I'd been there for a little while, I went out a different exit that I hadn't been out before. And it made me laugh that there was what you would see as a freezer door. A big restaurant or something would have a big walk-in freezer. A walk-in freezer door, but it went from the outside and you were walking into the freezer, which was basically outside. A lot of people said if you want to see how beautiful Antarctica is, you have to climb Observation Hill, which is not easy to do wearing all your Antarctic gear. But Dr. Trumbull and I did it. And here's the view looking towards the South Pole. And you can see some of the islands here. Here's the ice runway that we landed on. So this is ice that would leave every year. The Royal Society Mountains, or the Transantarctic Mountains, in the background. And again, remember from last time, these mountains, you're only seeing the peak of them. The rest of them is covered in ice. You can also see lots of snowmobiles and fish huts and things that were used for research out here. When it was time to use them, you had to walk out into what we call the transition and get your vehicles and then drive out. And this station is actually quite big. And that's because the McMurdo Station is the largest research station in Antarctica. And a lot of those other research stations will actually use McMurdo. They'll fly into McMurdo and everybody will receive their training before flying out to other research stations. So it can house up to 1,000 people. The dormitories where you would stay and sleep are over here. A lot of the mechanical stuff is over here. And then that's a picture of me with the Mount Erebus volcano in the background. And you can even see some of the smoke coming out of the active Erebus volcano. Now, it took a long time to get up, but it took almost no time to go down. Here's a picture of Dr. Trumbull tobogganing down on his back. And the real challenge was to try to stop yourself before you went out onto the road at the bottom. The other thing that was right beside the McMurdo Station was the Robert Falcon Scott Discovery Hut from their 1901 expedition. They came to Antarctica in 1901, and they built this here as a base by which they then went out and did some exploration around Antarctica. But inside this hut, there's still supplies that were left there from their expedition. And they looked the same as they had 100 years ago. There's little cookie tins over here that actually still had cookies, sheep carcasses, the sheep that they had brought down to eat and use, hot chocolate, so cocoa, and dog biscuits. It was pretty fascinating to walk around in this discovery hut. Robert Falcon Scott also built a second hut, and this is the one that they used for their expedition towards the South Pole. This one you could not enter. You can see that this one also had stables for ponies because they had used ponies in that expedition where they had not in the first one. And from Observation Hill, if you look the other way across the backside of the mountain, you could see the New Zealand research base, all in green. On this side, you can also see what I've highlighted here as our camp location. And so anybody who is new to Antarctica, who will be doing research and traveling off of the station, has to go to what is called Happy Camper School. And imagine that you are learning survival training to an extreme because you're doing it in Antarctica. After a few hours of training, we were prepared to go out to our camp location. And as we were doing that, a Condition 2 storm entered, and you can see it looks pretty crazy outside. And as we walk out of that hut, you can see it was a real storm. Again, it's an Antarctic storm, so they called it a Condition 2, the worst being a Condition 1. But a Condition 2 storm, as you can see, has wind speeds between 89 and 102 kilometers an hour, so very big wind speeds. And remember from last time, anywhere else in the world, a hurricane would be winds over 119 kilometers an hour. So we were having wind speeds that were very close to being a hurricane. We also had wind chills that were between minus 59 and minus 73. So we were in the minus 60s, and visibility less than 400 meters. And so you can see our visibility at times was much less than 400 meters. All the little flags are pointing straight out. The wind was quite strong. And it wasn't snowing, as I had said before. It was just the wind was so strong it would pick up the snow and blow it all around. We had to get our gear out of a small storage unit, and I had to climb on top of the storage unit and unbungee all of the Scott tents. As we were putting up our tents, we quickly realized that you can't just put pegs into the ground and have it held in place. You have to actually bury these pegs, and sometimes those pegs can't be buried easily, or they can get ripped out of the ground, so you actually have to bury something heavy with them. So sometimes we would tie these ropes to shovels and then bury the shovels in the ground. When instead of using pegs, you bury something, that's referred to as making a dead man. And then after we were all finished, we had built a snow wall to keep the wind away and everything. Then the storm passed, and we were ready to sleep. And so we had 6 mountaineering tents and 2 of these Scott tents that we slept in. It was minus 60 degrees Celsius, so it was cold. It was so cold that if you kept your camera out and tried to take more than one picture, the lens would start to freeze. You can see here, this is all ice up here on my camera lens. You can see the Delbridge Islands here in the background. Here's one, here's another, there's another smaller one over here, and this one here. So you can see these islands over here. Now, why would we want to go to these islands? Think about fast ice. So here's a good thing for you to go and look up. Think about fast ice. Why would we want to do that? Fast ice is going to have cracks in it, but why? This area here is moving up and down. Why is this area of ice moving up and down? Now, there's 3 ways to get out and around that we were allowed to use when we were in Antarctica. The first one is the piston bully. It travels at 16 kilometers an hour, and the islands were 16 kilometers away. So it would take us about 1 hour to get to the islands from the research station. It's not very big, but it was warm, but it was so slow. The most exciting way to get out there, but much, much colder, was the snowmobile. And they can travel 40 kilometers an hour, so you could get out there pretty quickly. As you drove, you actually would launch yourself, and sometimes we wrecked the snowmobiles and had to have them towed back in. And then the other way was walking, of course, and we had to do a lot of walking because you couldn't just snowmobile up beside where the seals were. And when we were finally done all our training and we had done our our scouting and tried to figure out where the seals were going to be. And we could not find seals anywhere. And this lasted about a week. And we were going out at different times of the day and everything. And it was a real challenge. But finally, one day, for whatever reason, we went out and all the seals were there. And it was pretty easy to get seals sampled after that. So challenge questions for this week. What ways does your body lose heat? And which ways might be more important for you to think about if you were in Antarctica? What areas around the McMurdo Bay would you use as clues to look for seals, and why? And why do Weddell seals come in so far into that frozen bay? And I look forward to seeing you in block number 3.
That concludes the second part of Dr. Hawk's lecture. Do you have any questions for Dr. Hawk? Make sure to write down your questions and send them in to us at mcyu@mcmaster.ca. Tune in next week for the third and final part of Dr. Hawk's lecture. Bye for now. We would also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our sponsors. Their support has made this program possible. And last but not least, we would especially like to thank you for coming out and learning with us.